So, Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut. My first one that I read by him, and that's probably the most suggested reading of him, for good reasons, because it is really one of his most seminal books, I think. Although he's obviously written a ton of other ones that are pretty much out there as well. But it is hard to kind of keep track of. Well, it's one of those things I probably had to read again, definitely, like a lot of things. But this was a different kind of non-linear reading experience because the book, which was published in 1969, mixes the real raw experience of what happened in Vonnegut's own life in World War II, as he actually did. He was in the army. He did get sent overseas and to fight for against the Nazis, and he was taken prisoner. All those things are real, but the novel starts off saying all this happened more or less, which is pretty much true. Like all this did happen more, in a sense, in this in the way that he kind of bends and twists, contorts events, is very compelling, I think. But sometimes it's hard to make headway, like what's going on, like when did this happen, like when did that end, especially when it gets to introduce the Tralfamadorans, I think, the Tralfamadorans. But we'll get to that in a second. But yes, follows Billy Pilgrim as he goes to fight for the war in 1944 or 5, near the end of the war. There's a bombing in Dresden, and what happens first is that there's I think it's like this one guy named Roland Wary is because what happens is Billy Pilgrim ends up thinking, basically realizing that he doesn't actually like to fight war, and right off the bat you actually get a sense from his name Pilgrim, because somebody's kind of traveling, kind of a religious kind of itinerant, peripatetic. But and then you get this other guy, Roland Wary, who's kind of the antithesis to Pilgrim, and ends up deriding him for being perceived to be cowardly because he doesn't want to fight in this war. And then he ends up, I think, killing him, and then saying something to the effect of like, "Revenge is the sweetest thing," or something. And then what happens is, like, right then after Pilgrim dies, in this timeline, he's kind of transmogrified, or he's it's kind of taking place, like his I think his soul is like transmuted, or something happens. Something happens at the point where Billy Pilgrim actually, in a different timeline, ends up alternate reality, basically not dying, and he ends up getting. What happens is he's kept in the Slaughterhouse 5, hence the name, in Dresden, Germany. When they're about to be bombed, the Nazis end up putting him in one of the empty slaughterhouses to save him, and that's how he survives the war. And basically from then on, thenceforth, there's a lot of confusing different things going on at the same time, with confusing, including the Tralfamadorians, I think, who are these race of aliens that are able to see time in all of its dimensions. Like, they're able to see the past, present, and the future all at once. So that makes sense when you end up seeing why Billy Pilgrim's, like, his event is, like, the rest of this stuff is, like, happening elsewhere. Like, it's all happening, the way that these aliens see it is, like, totally different for them. It's like, they're seeing, like, kind of the whole envelope of time, I guess, all-encompassing. And at one point, I think he ends up meeting Billy Trout, I think, or Trout, Kilgore Trout. Yeah, I remember that name because I recently read his Vonnegut's other book, Breakfast of Champions, and basically Kilgore Trout is in one of those characters that kind of ends up in all sorts of different Vonnegut books. I think multiple different ones. And yeah, he ends up meeting him, and he's a science fiction writer, I think. Kind of reminds me of the way that Philip K. Dick describes science, kind of uses the trope of the science fiction writer, and he writes about kind of a meta fiction, writing about a science fiction writer. Like in the sense of Valis, especially. And yeah, so in Slaughterhouse 5, this is a trope that shows up in all other of his writing, obviously too. And it's just an interesting thing, seeing how the contrast between the human race and the human species, and how the Tralfamadorians, how they perceive time being, totally not differently, and that frees them up to, for empathy and towards other they're way more enlightened and way more advanced than we are, and yeah, trying to understand and through a linear kind of orthogonal timeline is just not going to work out. So yeah, he I think towards the end of the novel, not to spoil too much, but because I think this one is really worth the read, it does, I think, when one of the characters facing death, I think Billy Pilgrim is scared. I think he's like, if you're scared, then you haven't listened to a word I said, is one of the last words, which is really, I think, a pretty strong statement, because it's pretty, there really isn't, like, death happens, and it's like, early in the novel, kind of, the novel's kind of bookended by death in a sense, but it's also, not something to be afraid of. It's not something to, it's not something to be disgusted or to keep avoiding, really. So yeah, Slaughterhouse 5, definitely really interesting kind of magic realism thing going on. Like, a lot of, you don't know, magically real in the sense that events are being described as, really odd supernatural kind of events are being described as if they are a part of the original kind of consensus of people should, as if they're not really what they are. Like, they're just like described normally and placid, kind of prosaically. So yeah, that in that kind of camp, Vonnegut is pretty. I listened to a bit of a lecture on him and how he describes his writing and how he describes time as well, and I thought it was really interesting that he describes it as his kind of process as being, there's kind of, a good and a bad kind of aspect of a lot of writing, and that he's trying to not avoid or denigrate, but definitely kind of improve and kind of go beyond, in a sense. Like, he's like, you slay the dragon and kind of thing, and I think he was trying to kind of counter that. It's something like more enticing, like more kind of like, timelines and different things that intertwine with each other is, I think, in his mind, is a lot, there's hence why there's a lot of kind of crazy people going on in his novels too. It's the point where it's a little bit of that thing where it's like, you don't know how much of it is them just kind of hallucinating and having visions, or how much of it is true, corporeal experiences. So yeah, Slaughterhouse 5. So thanks for watching.